Friends, we are now at the hour to begin the funeral service for Mr. Mel Ashman. As a reminder, those of us with cell phones, I kindly ask that you please turn them off during the duration of the service. Conducting the funeral here at the chapel and at Shalom Memorial Park, where the interment will take place, the spiritual leader of Congregation Am Shalom, Rabbi Stephen Stark Lowenstein.
Shiviti Adonai lenegdi tamid. I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side. I shall not be moved. Therefore does my heart exalt, my soul rejoice. My being is secure. For you will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful one see destruction. You show me the path of life. Your presence brings fullness of joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. Death has taken our beloved Mel Ashman. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence there is lamentation. In their tears there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, be with them. For Mel's love that united us in life, which death cannot sever. For his companionship that we shared along life's path, which now continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of his heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness, and is now a precious, precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. In the Jewish tradition, when we would hear of the death of our loved ones, our ancestors would actually tear their clothes. Mel spent a whole lot of time selling clothes. He would not want you to tear them. Or if you did, then you'd have to buy them again. So maybe he would, but we make a small little tear in a ribbon. Only direct mourners are obligated to wear a kriya ribbon. In the Jewish tradition, direct mourners are spouses, incredible spouses of 64 years. Wow, Bobby, really special. Children, and Mel loved his 3 children and the families that you've created and the love that you bring to each other and to your families. Siblings, and unfortunately he is the last of an incredible group of brothers, the last of 4, and we honor this moment of a transition, Lador Vador, from generation to generation. And parents, those are the four direct mourners. So spouses, children, siblings, and parents, wear this small little ribbon as a reminder of our hearts that are torn. And while you actually physically tear this ribbon, it serves as a reminder of your hearts that are torn. But I know the 4 of you well enough to know that you don't need that reminder. You're going to feel that every single day because of the way that he lived, the way that he laughed, the way that he loved, the way that it was always about family. Family first. That was Mel. And we feel that, and we know that. So I ask each of you to start at the bottom of the little ribbon. Children wear it over their hearts. All other relatives wear it close to their hearts. Start at the bottom, and I just invite you to just make a little tear in that ribbon. For our hearts that are torn, we perform this act of kriya. Bobby, with your hand, we'll take care of that for you. And we say these words, Baruch, Baruch, Atah, Adonai, Eloheinu, Melech, Ha'olam, Dayan, Ha'emet. We praise you, Adonai, our God, ruler of the universe, Dayan Ha'emet, the judge of truth, for it's God's judgment that has taken him. And we accept that. Even if the best seamstress in the world was hired to repair that ribbon, there would always be a mark. There's no way to repair that ribbon without leaving a mark. You will always feel that mark. For Mel, who loved all of you so very much, who was just such a good, personable, fun human being. All of these pictures are tribute to the incredible, incredible life that he lived. We measure lives not in time, but in grace, in the joy with which they live and the love that they leave behind. Melvin Ashman leaves so much love behind here, in this funeral home, in Chicago, in Arizona, and in everywhere that people knew him and loved him. We find comfort from the words of our tradition. Psalm 121. Esa enai el ha'ri me'ayin yavo Ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from God, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your protector will not slumber. See, the protector of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your guardian. God is your protection at your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. God will guard your soul, your going and coming, now and forever. We extend our deepest condolences to Roberta, to Bobby, to Brad and to Laura, to Rick, to Rob and to Mindy, and to grandchildren Michael, Tommy, Rachel, and Nikki. Wow. Not a day went by that he didn't say how proud he was, how much he loved all of you, how special each one of you is, was, and will always be for an incredible, incredible man. We find comfort from the words of the 23rd Psalm. The words are included in the service supplement. We listen to these words in Hebrew. As a traditional Jew growing up, these words were so important. Of the 150 Psalms, this 23rd Psalm, by far the most famous, reminds us that we're not alone, that God is with us, helping us in our most difficult times. Adonai ro'i lo exar beno desha yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yinachaleni nafshi yashovev, yancheni b'mag leitzedek lama'an shemo, gam ki elech b'geit salmavet, lo irara ki ata imadi, ach tov v'chesed yirdafuni kol yemei chayai, v'shavti b'beit Adonai la'orech yamim. Together, we read, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. At this hour, the blessed presence of family and friends brings comfort and strength. It says to us, be sure that love, the spring of life, abides. May all who mourn take heart as they remember the goodness they've given and received. And when the days of their mourning are ended, may the memory of their loved ones come to be a blessing. Merritt Malloy wrote the following: when I die, if you need to cry, cry for your brother walking the street beside you. And when you need to give me something, give him what you need to give to me. I want to leave you something better than words or sounds. Look for me in the people I've known or loved, and if you cannot give me away, at least let me live in your eyes and not on your mind. You can love me most by letting hands touch hands, by letting bodies touch bodies, and by letting go of children who need to be free. Love doesn't die, people do. So when all that's left of me is love, give me away. If you remember nothing else from today, I hope you remember. Love doesn't die, people do. And so we hold on to that love. That love is part of who we are. That love helps us through our most difficult times. That love carries us. And we know that he loved us back in so many incredible ways. In a book called God Whispers, it's written, the true worth of a life is the story that it leaves behind. Tell that story well. Did he teach you about love? Did he personify genius or sensitivity? Did his life warn you of the danger of bitterness and anger? As I stand and behold the eyes of those who mourn, I realize the only difference between people in this world is not their wealth, their fame, or their success. The only difference is those that had love in their life and those who did not. Melvin H. Ashman had love in his life from the day he came into this world, from his brothers, his parents, his extended family, but most of all from his children and grandchildren. And so we begin with you, Brad and Rick and Mindy. I invite the three of you in birth order to come up forward to begin to pay tribute to your incredible father. Brad, you're first.
My father adored my mother. That's the lesson he taught us, and that's the lesson he learned from his father, Albert. It was always about her, how lucky he was, how beautiful she is, even right up until the end. His biggest concern after the cancer diagnosis was that she would be taken care of. Don't worry about a thing, Mom. You're covered. I'm Brad, Bobby and Mel's oldest. When one of the truly tough, resilient men passes away, you can feel the air coming out of the room. And that's how I felt. When you're growing up as a child, you think your dad can fix anything. And I don't mean a toaster. I meant some issue you're having with your life. Because he's your dad. That was my dad. As you get older and you have kids of your own, you realize how amazing your parents were, and your dad can't fix everything. Daddy was born on the west side of Chicago to parents from Belarus and Poland, Albert and Tilly. Another love story. Yiddish was spoken in the home and on the playground. English was first learned when you hit public school. The kids played in nearby Douglas Park. Daddy graduated from Marshall High, did a little college, and met my mom through a cousin. They were married and had quite a journey together for 64 years. So where do you start speaking about my dad? And I decided to talk about his work life. Around 19, my father started selling wristwatches. He didn't call them watches, wristwatches. Out of a briefcase on the street. He was so good at it, the guys told him he was his own business. He was creating so much business. He would play poker on Friday nights. When he won, he would sneak back into this Orthodox home because he wasn't supposed to be out. And when he lost, he would take his briefcase and he would go back out and he would sell more watches till he made his money back. It's amazing how you support a family in Deerfield. Eventually, he started his own credit clothing store with Hershey Meyer. He was so successful at that time, he would repeatedly tell me how he bought a brand new car and paid it off in 3 months. Because if you realize my dad was probably 22 years old, maybe 21. The first store was destroyed during the '68 riots, and my father was wiped out. He started over again, this time with Hershey Meyer and Charlie Spagnoli. Another successful business was destroyed by fire in 1972. He was again wiped out, and then Daddy went to work for the Friedmans doing inside carpet sales. My siblings and me were in the dark as to his financial troubles. We were going to camp and being supported as my father worked like a dog to keep us in our home. Eventually, he saved enough money to once again go back into business himself, this time with Maury Friedman. They purchased an existing retail junior department store in Humboldt Park and renamed it Mormel. Working long and grueling retail hours, the store was very successful and allowed the partners to expand, purchasing the existing Boston department store at Milwaukee and Armitage. We now refer to this neighborhood as Bucktown. Other stores followed, and the operation continued until 1995, when they closed their doors for good. The stories that I could tell of my father's work year would not be entirely appropriate to share right now. It was another area that I operated in. I will share my dad's greatest work triumph. In the mid-'70s, my dad and Maury went on a buying trip to New York. Now the hot style then with the Hispanic kids were tan work pants, referred to as baggies, khakis, or chinos. Daddy saw a garbage man wearing Dickies work pants in New York with a pinstripe down the side. And he told Maury, we could sell a ton of those. So they placed an order with the sanitation department in New York, wherever they were buying their clothes from, put a sign up in his window at Mormel and said, we have New York baggies. They sold out instantly, reordered, and now they placed them in their other location at Boston, which was a much bigger store. As the style was burning out, Daddy decided to gamble the ranch. And him and Maury, they put all their money together, and they invented a pant that we now call the cargo baggie. And what it was an army pant that had 4 pockets on top of these baggies, and they contracted a company called Stratojack, and the order was so big, so large, that semi-trucks were coming into my dad's store, Boston department store, to supply all these pants. The payment had to be made back to Stratojack so fast. My father, even though he was selling them like crazy, it was the biggest hit ever. He couldn't pay it off in time, and he had to start wholesaling the pants to his competitors just to make the payment in time. He ordered them again and again, and after the first time, the retailers were coming to him to buy pants. And his wholesale operation was great. During this time, he had a proud moment when an executive from Sears came into the Boston department store and was bringing his underlings with him, telling them how why smaller operators could outsell them because they could move with the trends quickly. Just to let you know, these cargo style is still around today. Take a look at what Adam Sandler wears. And you all probably have, guys, you all probably have a pair of cargo shorts in your closet. Growing up, our father was not the dad who was at our sporting events, not because that he didn't want to, but he needed to work. Eventually, all of us worked in the stores. That's where we saw our father. Every weekend and summers, I worked retail. Even after I was married and had my own business, Daddy would call me. Okay, I need you the Friday after Thanksgiving, then weekends till Christmas. I'm like, Daddy, I have my own life. I want to take a vacation during the break. He's like, yeah, sure. I'll see you at 9 a.m. on Friday, then weekends through Christmas. Don't forget the keys because I'll need you to open up on Sunday. If you know my father, he didn't quite say it like that. I sanitized it for you. It is impossible to talk about my father without talking about my mother. They were inseparable. They always spent the day together on my father's day off, Thursdays growing up, then Mondays and every other Sunday until he retired. I always think of them together as one entity. Mom ran the house, Daddy the business, period. They went out for dinner at least once, sometimes twice a week. Daddy didn't golf or have many other hobbies. When he wasn't working, His hobby was my mother and us. Well, he did play poker and was a reader of books, especially World War II spy novels. In '97, they bought their current home in Scottsdale and have lived most of the year there since then. Odds and ends, I didn't quite know how to put together. Daddy smoked 4 packs of cigarettes a day, Parliament, hard pack, until the mid-'80s, about 30 years. He would send me to the gas station on my bike to pick up Parliaments for him and then put it on his bill. There was no charge cards in those days. He quit cold turkey in about the mid-'80s. In my 20s, I was giving my father a hard time about not being able to fix anything because he couldn't change a bulb. He told me, you know what I'm good at? This is how he told me, you know what I'm good at? I'm good at making money so I can pay guys like you to fix it for me. Whenever my father asked me to take care of things after that, I just said, okay. My dad was all about family and eagerly attended all get-togethers, weddings, holidays. He would be the first one to get there and the last one to leave. His goodbyes were legendary and could take over an hour. Daddy had a special knack for calling during the busiest time of my workday. He called just to see what was happening, talk about the kids, how business was. We'd have to cut him off after about 15 minutes. Going to miss that. His grandchildren, Michael, Tommy, Rachel, and Nikki, would call to chat with my parents more often than you think. If they didn't, my father would call them to ask them about their lives and check up on them. He thought of them as his own. My wife Laura was treated like a daughter. He was always kind and generous with her. I've saved the best for last. Food. Daddy was a world champ eater. As soon as he finished his meal, he was already talking about the next one. Literally. Going to restaurants with my parents growing up was a blast. We probably live in Highwood now just because of all the great memories going to Two Guys from Italy back in the day. Daddy would let me order 2 dinners just to watch me eat. No slouch himself, my mother would make massive amounts of food for dinner. To this day, I think that's normal. Up until a few years ago, he could still pack it away. He remembered every meal he ever had with vivid detail and could tell you about it. I will now share my father's favorite meal. It has been a family secret that he told me when I was a kid. It was the one my mother fed him that night. It wasn't a secret. He told my mom every time as soon as he finished the meal. Michael. Do you want me to read it? Let this kid start here. I can't do it anymore. Yeah.
My grandfather's generation is almost all gone now. Just like my mom and Aunt Betty are left from those amazing Passover dinners, Hanukkah parties, and Father's Day get-togethers. I'm very sad about that. I can't call my dad anymore to talk about food, business, his grandchildren, the stock market, or listen to him complain about the Bears. Special thanks to my amazing wife Laura for her patience with me and all the help she's given us while my father was sick. My brother-in-law Rob for always assisting my parents, never said no to them. My brother for always visiting my parents, and from the bottom of my heart, my sister Mindy for the constant care and support she provided for mom and daddy the last 4 months.
Perfect.
Thanks.
Thank you. Rick, I invite you to come forward.
We might cover some of the same ground, but It's worth repeating. I'm Rick, middle child. Most of you know that, I'm sure. My dad passed on a Wednesday. And Thursday was one of the biggest stock market rallies in history. I waited for the phone to ring and my father to have that excited tone in his voice as he always would after a big up day. Going through most of his stocks, asking how I did, he always said it really didn't matter. It wouldn't change his life if it went up or down. I suspect it was just another reason for us to speak, which we did nearly every day, often more than that after we retired in the mid-90s. Soon after his retirement, my parents bought a nice ranch-style home and relocated to Scottsdale, and I moved there as well in 2015, about 10 minutes from them. I'd see he and my mom at least a couple times a week, often for a meal my mom would make, maybe watch an episode of Jeopardy, one of his favorite shows. We'd all yell out our answers, right or wrong, as if we were contestants on the show. Or I would join them for dinner at any restaurant of my liking, as long as it was one of their favorites. Hey, those were the rules. He would always say how lucky and happy he was to have me so close by. And in 2021, Mindy, Rob, and Nikki joined in on the fun and moved from California to the Valley of the Sun. One of his favorite topics was his grandkids and how they would call just to chat long before he was ill. He was so proud of his kids and grandkids. Michael's success in business and finishing up school. Tommy forging an exciting new life in California. Nikki excelling in school at nearby ASU. And Rachel following in her father's footsteps at Illinois. He loved how cousins Rachel and Nikki were as close as sisters their whole lives, despite the thousands of miles that separated them. So proud of his son Brad, who overcame immense challenges in his life to have a very successful construction and renovation business. His daughter Mindy, who he always spoke of glowingly, all her travels and accomplishments. He treated his son-in-law Rob and his daughter-in-law Laura like his own kids from day one. That's just the kind of man he was. Family meant everything to him. Well, that and a good Italian meal or a corned beef sandwich. You know all the stories, I'm sure. Yes, he was loud, boisterous, hot-headed, stubborn, and difficult, but also funny, sensitive, loving, insightful, and introspective, particularly as he got older and mellowed out, as my mom would say. He loved to tell stories, especially of the old days as a young man in business. A born salesman, he would say of himself, all he ever wanted to be, and he was great at it, just like his father, Albert. At one time, he sold watches on the streets of Chicago while supporting a family in suburban Deerfield, proud that he was earning as much or more than his wealthy neighbors on pure hard work and long hours. There was one time he was in his car with his father riding shotgun, and he approached a man walking and tried to sell him a watch. The man hemmed and hawed until Albert turned to the man and said, "Take it from an old man. It's a good deal." The sale was made. The Ashman boys working as a team. As a young man in his 20s, he was very thin. In fact, his friends called him slim, despite the fact he could eat a half dozen sandwiches and still have room for dessert. As a teenager, his mother was so embarrassed of his voracious appetite that she would feed him parts of a meal at a time. Half a chicken there, pound of brisket there, just in case neighbors stopped by, so there wouldn't be a banquet-sized meal in front of one wide-eyed kid. His mother was so concerned she took him to the doctor, fearing a tapeworm or some other medical condition. Nope, just an incredibly hungry kid with a magical metabolism. He reminisced of his poker-playing abilities and loved those games with his buddies, all smoking their cigarettes and cigars, laughing their asses off like something out of an old black and white 60s movie or an episode of The Odd Couple with Oscar Madison and the boys. He was there for the camaraderie, but also to win, which he did much more than he lost. I thought also like to throw in, I thought of this, that he was also a bowler in his early days, and Brad became a really good bowler as well, and I did later on. He had a great average, and he loved to boast about it. A 180, 185 average. He and my mom belonged in a bowling league for a few years when we were young. As a matter of fact, about 20 years since the last time he'd picked up a bowling ball, I went with him. Brad might have been there. I don't recall. Hadn't touched it in 20 years, bowled a 205 that day. So proud of himself, he talked about it at least once a year. But what I remember most and miss about my dad is how close we became after his retirement and my parents moved to Arizona some 26 years ago. Sure, we could talk for hours about stocks, movies, TV, politics, his meals, sports, especially the Bears and his beloved Phoenix Suns. He recorded and watched every game. But what surprised me most and what most people don't know was his incredible depth and ability to talk about life, love, relationships, and relate to me despite being from a different generation and time. He really could talk, but was even better at listening and giving me advice and support. I always thought, where did he get this incredible superpower? A man who was with the same woman from age 19, and yet he really could relate to and never judge my relationship decisions. And I loved him for that. But the real story of Mel Ashman, as my brother mentioned, is also the story of Roberta Ashman, a lifelong partnership and romance that he often said was the greatest accomplishment of his life. In the early days, she was Bobby Baby. Later on, Honey. A team in every sense of the word. He was the breadwinner. She was the homemaker. She'd make the meals. He'd do the dishes. Teamwork. And they always took care of each other. He spoke of my mother with such pride, his 66 plus years they spent together. He constantly told her how beautiful she was, how much he adored her, and that it was the greatest decision of his life. He'd always say, "Isn't your mother perfect? Look how beautiful she is," even in the last weeks of his life. They were so connected and rarely spent a night apart over 64 years of marriage. My brother once said something years ago to me that always stuck with me. There are only two people in this world that I'm 100% sure have been faithful to their wives, me and Daddy. He was old school, family and close friends first, because that's what matters most in life. He and his brother Marty were especially tight. He loved and admired him so much. "My brother, the federal judge," he'd say with a big wide grin. Even after 10 years since his passing, he still would well up when he'd speak of him, which was often. I interviewed my father in 2015 and asked him what the secret to a successful marriage was. Without hesitation, he said respect, compromise, although I think that was mostly on my mom's part, hard work, and just luck that he found the love of his life on a blind date in 1956, just months before his 20th birthday. He said he knew the moment he saw her. She was 17, pretty and sweet, and he knew he'd spend the rest of his life with her. In his words, "I was smitten," to which my mom smiled and said, "Yes, smitten." He was an old-fashioned guy, shaved every day, until the last days of his life. A fun young man of the world, he'd say of himself. She was a quiet girl, but I'd soon help change that. He was an incredibly lucky man, and he knew it. I asked him if there was anything he would want people to remember about him, and he said simply that I was a good person and I loved my family. Daddy, I think you got your wish.
Mindy, I invite you to come forward.
I wanted to thank everyone for joining me and my family today to remember the life of my daddy, Mel Ashman. I'm the youngest family, my brother Brad and Rick, and then there was me. I always remember my dad saying, when he found out he was having a girl and I came out, and my mom always laughed about this, that he bought the finest, I think it was whiskey or scotch, and gave it to the doctor. And my mom always said, like, the doctor had anything to do with it. My dad enjoyed his life and always told me family is so important. I'm so glad Rob and I moved to Arizona last year, just by chance. Not for any reason, I just wanted to be closer to my mom and dad and my brother. My daughter ended up going to school there, and everyone said, were you following her? And I said, no, it was just we wanted to go somewhere warm, and I wanted to live near family, because we haven't lived near family in so long. He always told everyone, including the waiters and waitresses, how happy he was that his daughter, son-in-law, and granddaughter finally moved to Arizona. This past year has meant so much to me, because it gave me so much more time with my parents than I ever had before. Even when I lived in California, we called each other to talk about what book we were reading and which one we should read next. It was so great sharing books on our Kindle together. We enjoyed the same exact books. My dad's favorite store was Costco. Him and I have the fear of running out of that toilet paper all the time. So we'd always laugh about who has more stocked up at any given time. Every time I came over, he would ask if I needed any toilet paper to bring some home. One of my favorite things he would always say, even after being married to my mom for 64 years, "Isn't your mother gorgeous?" In his final days, we were talking, and we were just telling funny stories, and I think my brother Rick mentioned someone that he used to trade with that maybe once or was really wanting to go out with my mom, and my mom remembered the guy's name. It was like in high school or something. And my dad said, "Well, I know what your mother remembers. Us snuggling in the back seat." And I go, "What's snuggling?" My dad, even how sick he was, had the biggest smile on his face, and he kind of said in a shy way, "Well, that's kissing." And I started laughing, and I just thought it was so cute. I loved him so very much, and I am going to miss him dearly, and I'm so glad I got to be with him in his final months.
Perfect. Tommy, I invite you to come forward representing all of the grandchildren.
Papa Mel meant something different to all of us. He was a proud Navy veteran, an incredibly hardworking salesman, a smart and determined business owner, a strong father, and a loving husband. But to four of us, he was a kind and warm grandfather. He was there for every important life and family event, always smiling, always wanting to spend time with his grandchildren and family. When I was 7 years old, Papa Mel took me to see Batman begins in theaters. When we were walking out, he said it was the longest movie he'd ever seen and he couldn't wait for it to end. But when I said I loved it, he only wanted to talk about the parts I liked, and it's still one of my favorite movies to this day. Papa Mel had a way of conversing that made you feel like the most important person in the world when you were talking to him. He was genuinely interested in every person. This wasn't just for his family. Even when he was around his children's and grandchildren's friends, he welcomed them and got to know them as if they were his family too. One of my friends met him at our birthday party in July, about a week after his diagnosis, and he told me he didn't get to learn that much about Papa Mel because Papa Mel kept asking him questions about himself instead. In a lot of ways, I only started to know my grandfather as a man recently. I didn't understand the depth of his character as a boy, but as a man I have the deepest respect and admiration for Papa Mel. He had an unstoppable attitude in life. Giving up was never an option. When I asked him how he overcame the challenges of having his stores burnt down, he told me he did it because he had to, because it was his duty to his family. The how didn't matter as long as he had the why. Even facing cancer, he didn't lose himself. He was still bright and charismatic with the doctors and nurses, asking them questions about themselves and telling them the stories of his life. Always smiling when he met someone new, and he never stopped thinking about how he was going to provide for Grandma Honey and the rest of his family. He was still excited to see what the rest of our lives had in store for us. When I think of the work ethic I need to support my family one day, I'll always think of him. And I hope we can all keep living lives that would make Papa Mel smile and be excited to hear about. Thank you for sharing the first 24 years of my life with me, and I'm glad that I got to share the last 24 years of yours with you.
Wow. 4 incredible eulogies from 4 incredible people. 2 generations paying tribute to an amazing human being. I look at all these pictures and I'm reminded of the words that Simon and Garfunkel wrote in a song called Bookends. Time it was, and what a time it was. A time of innocence, a time of confidences. Long ago it must be, I have a photograph. Preserve your memories. They're all that's left you. In many ways, I feel that that's exactly what we are in the business of doing. Preserving our memories. Preserving our memories of a man who lived 86 years, but truly lived those years his way. Surrounded by the people that he loved, doing what he loved for as long as possible. It was about family and about resilience. It was about being social and about being loving. He was the friendliest guy, a loving husband who adored his wife, and all of you adored him. In many ways, he was one of a kind. Time it was, and what a time it was. As you heard, he grew up on the GVS, the Great West Side. His dad worked for Henry Ford. He was an honest man. Mel went into the car upholstery business. Albert did. Mel was the third of 4 brothers. Joe, Martin, Mel, and Jack. Now all of blessed memory. Mel was the last of the 4 to die. The last of this line of a great generation. Throughout his life, he was supportive of Israel, and I love this picture of Rachel's bat mitzvah. And I had the honor of being in Israel with him, of watching and seeing Israel through his eyes. While he said he had many trips to Israel, that one was the best, he would always say, because he was with his family. And he could see Israel coming alive in all of you. I love the story, Roberta, that you went out with Cousin Harvey. You had no interest at all in Harvey. And we're glad for that. But Harvey called Mel and said, hey, you might be interested, and voila. The two of you went ring shopping in a snowstorm. Married September 7th, 1958 at the Sherman Hotel. You honeymooned in California, you told me, where you saw the Kingston Trio and a young, up-and-coming comedian named Phyllis Diller. And so began 64 years of marriage, 64 years of partnership, 64 years of togetherness. I love that you asked your dad, Rick, about what was the key to a long marriage. I asked your mom that, and you said, send him to work. Great advice. All he wanted to do was to provide for his family, and whatever it took, he did. He worked hard. He retired before age 60. He learned to mellow. He loved to spend time with his family. He closed so many people from his store. I love the email that you shared with me. The cousins from Israel saying that he was always there, and they were the best dressed people on the kibbutz. He was loyal to his peeps, his employees, his longtime associates. Here was a man who was always warm. He always wanted to spend time with his family. He cared deeply about what happened in all of your lives, especially his grandchildren. You were all a huge part of Papa Mel's life. And so all of you, all of us, those here in this room, those on live stream, will miss his presence, his genuine happiness, his love of reading, his love of the Bears. And yes, it's only fitting that the Bears lost by 1 just yesterday. He'd be so frustrated. And his love of the Phoenix Suns. He never missed a birthday. The pandemic was so hard on so many people, but it was especially hard on Mel, as here was a man who was fueled for the first 83 years of his life with people, and to know how different the world had become these last 2 years. He loved his Romeo group, retired old men eating out, having lunch with the guys. He loved his life. He lived it well. His friends adored him. The Romeos adored him and enjoyed the time that they spent together. When he was diagnosed just 4 months ago, Stu, one of his friends, said his name every week that he was at Torah study. He taught you, Mindy, Brad, and Rich, he taught you how to handle hard situations. He shared his business knowledge. He taught you all to be independent and strong, to be a guy who loved being his own boss. He taught you to be successful, to work hard, to make your own way, to be your own boss. He brought his family together. And as you heard, all of you really stepped up to be with Mom and to be with Dad. But both Rick and Brad shared with me, Mindy, that you were a rock star every step along the way, especially these last months. Always there, always present. How lucky that your family moved to Arizona. He knew that all of you would take care of Mom, and I know that you will. That was his only worry. Just 4 months ago, he was diagnosed with cancer. He fought for as long as he could. He had radiation and immunotherapy. He wanted to fight. He wasn't ready to just roll over. He didn't want to be taken care of. He wanted to remain in control, and fought for these last 4 months for as long as he could. But in so many ways, he died the same way that he lived, with courage, with resilience, with strength, with determination, but most of all with love. Time it was, and what a time it was. A time of innocence, a time of confidences. Long ago it must be, I have a photograph. Preserve your memories. They're all that's left you. I hope and pray that you will preserve Papa Mel's memories for a long time to come. Though he lived 86 years on this earth, he can live a lot longer. When there are generations in this world that aren't even born yet that will know about an incredible man who lived life, who made this world better, who served our country with distinction, which is why the flag is on the casket and why the military honor guard will meet us at the cemetery. He made this world better. He'll never be forgotten. Please rise. El Malay Rachamim, God full of compassion, dwelling on the heights and the depths, grant perfect rest under the wings of your presence to Mel Ashman, who has entered eternity. May he find refuge forever under the shadow of God's wings. May his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us all say, Amen. Together, for those not going to the cemetery, we say the mourner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, ve'almad divrach hirutei v'amlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei kol beit Yisrael, b'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mavorach le'olam omei omaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitroman v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudsha brichu, la'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, Tushbachata v'nechamata, damiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort all who are bereaved, and let us all say, Amen.
Amen. Friends, you may be seated, please. Friends, upon the conclusion of the interment at Shalom, the family will be receiving calls of condolence at the Renaissance Hotel at 933 Skokie Boulevard in Northbrook. A memorial luncheon will begin at that hotel at the conclusion of the cemetery when everyone arrives back at the hotel. The family will be together until 9 p.m. this evening receiving your calls of condolence. Again, that's at the Renaissance Hotel at 933 Skokie Boulevard in Northbrook. The interment service will take place at Shalom Memorial Park. A military honor guard will be present along with Rabbi Steve, who will then do the final prayers and the burial, which will then follow. If you will be joining us to the cemetery, we do ask that you please obtain from our staff a bright orange funeral safety sticker, which you will need to apply to the inner right-hand side of your car windshield. We will also have funeral flags for you that will go on your car. We ask that you please put your bright headlights on and your flashing hazard lights, and that you stay as close as possible to the car in front of you. Even though our distance is short to the cemetery, sometimes if there's a big space between cars in a funeral procession, other cars can get in and then, get in the way of the procession, making the cortege to the cemetery. So we please do ask that you stay as close as you can to the car in front of you, have your bright headlights on, and your flashing hazard lights. The following individuals will be performing the honor of pallbearer, and as I call your name, I do ask that you please step forward up to the casket. Rob, Chuck, Michael, Thomas, Rachel, and Nikki. And I ask that you rise.
Ose shalom bimromav, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'yimru, yimru, amen. Yase shalom, Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom. Yaseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Go your way, for God has called you. Go your way, and may God be with you. May your righteousness go before you, and the glory of God receive you. Friends.
Now return to your cars, please. Thank you.